We read that, for upon whom else is the universal nation believed, but upon the Christ who has already come? For whom have the nations believed? Parthians, Mede, Elamites, and they who inhabit Mesopotamia and Armenia, Phrygia, Cappadocia, and those who dwell in Pontus and Asia and Pamphylia, tarriers in Egypt, and inhabitants of the region of Africa, which is beyond Cyrene, Romans and sojourners, yes, in Jerusalem, Jews, and all other nations, as for instance, varied nations of the Gaetilians, and the manifold confines of the Moors, all the limits of Spain, and the diverse nations of the Gauls, and the haunts of the Britons, inaccessible to the Romans, but subjugated to Christ, in all which places the name of the Christ who is already come reigns. This was written by Tertullian only 75 years after the death of John, indicating that there are histories of Christianity, of Sabbath-keeping Christians that believed in the Messiah, yes, Seventh-day Adventists, that we have little knowledge of today, but they represented the further extent of the Christian world. Rome was really a small portion of the vast world that existed at the time of the apostles. Why do we know so little about the history of our people? There has been a tremendous effort on the part of Rome to completely obliterate the history of the Sabbath-keeping bodies so as to make themselves appear to be the true Christian church. But we find that the roads were open for the youth of these various countries who bade father and mother farewell as they responded to the Macedonian call. Travelers passed at the famous cities of Edessa or Arbela as they passed on their way from the Celts of Ireland to the Celts of Turkestan or Mongolia. Neither the hoarfrost in the tableland nor the monsoons of India could restrain the zealous evangelists of the Syrian missions. In their hands they held that fountain of inspiration, the Peshitta, of the Syrian translation of the Bible. The place that is occupied among the English-speaking people of the King James was held in the East by this Peshitta Bible. It was a vast Christian network. Young men, missionaries, following the apostolic origins of the Syrian church at Antioch, spread the truth all through the countries of the East, even to the mountains of Mongolia. Nothing could stop these young men. This was the primitive Christian church with the experience of the outpouring of the early rain. These young men with Bibles in their hands and with the faith of God in their hearts could not be stopped. The snow, the rain, the jungles, nothing could stop these people. And listen, the fruit of it can be seen throughout that part of the world. Why was Syria such an important center? Well, it was in 70 A.D. when a tremendous amount of persecution forced the Christians from Jerusalem up into the wealthy Jewish centers of ancient Syria. Antioch was the opulent headquarters or capital city, and it was here that Paul and Barnabas carried on the center of their evangelistic work. The Syrian church, then, becomes the great headquarters of the apostolic church, with the teachings of the Sabbath, the same doctrines as we hold as Seventh-day Adventists. And these Syrian missionaries, the highest culture in the world at that time, could not be stopped. They had magnificent educational centers in that part of the world. And one of the geniuses produced by this high culture was a man by the name of Lucian. Lucian, a young man raised in the hills of Syria in the 3rd century, could see the arise of apostasy in Alexandria and Rome. He watched the movement of asceticism come in and the false doctrines. He determined to follow the gift of the Spirit, and he followed the gift he was given, a discernment, which was used to understand which writings were true from the apostles and which of the writings were apocryphal or false writings that were destructive or deadly to the early Christian teachings. Lucian was called upon to face these heresies, and although he had not succeeded completely in removing them, nevertheless, he did build for everyone in the future a safe retreat. What is that? The Protestant Bible. The Protestant denominations are built upon that manuscript of the Greek New Testament, sometimes called the Textus Receptus, or the received text. It is that Greek New Testament from the writings of the apostles in Greek have been translated into English, German, Dutch, and other languages. During the Dark Ages, the received text was almost completely unknown because it was Greek, and the Roman Church tried to destroy everything Greek. But they couldn't stop this church. We find that in Edessa and in Nisibis, the greatest medical institutions of the age were to be found. research into the area of the medical sciences were found in these institutions, and their learning spread eventually to become the foundation of literary genius in the Western world. The School of Antioch at that time surpassed almost every other scientific and literary repute, and its methods dominated all the East. Justinian, in the middle of the 6th century, wished to rebuild the Cathedral of Constantinople, and from the School of Antioch he drew both his architects, Athamas of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. While Europe was under the demoralized darkness of the Dark Ages, the Syrian Church was bringing the great world of the East into a height of knowledge and learning. When we remember how much of the culture of medieval Europe was come to her through the Saracens, and that the historians were the teachers of the Saracens, one is said asking whether Oxford, Cambridge, and Paris do not owe an unsuspected debt to Barsoma, though the road from Nisibis to those centers may run through Baghdad and then Salamanca in Spain. Europe was under the superstitious fear of the Roman Church. Well, at that time, the Sabbath-keeping Christians, the Seventh-day Adventists, were the teachers of the great rulers of the Muslim world and came into a close connection and appreciation of these leaders. So later, when they went to assault the Western world, they protected the Sabbath-keepers while they destroyed Christians. It says that for centuries, the followers of Jesus in Asia generally were called Messians, or Messiah people. Many renowned Messians who withstood the fierce opposition of the Persian state religion or Mithraism carried primitive Christianity to India, Central Asia, China, and even to Japan. We can see these brilliant missionaries heading off into the worlds of the East. But in Syria today, the old Syrian Empire extended all the way from Decapolis way up into Turkey today. This area holds literally hundreds of small ruined cities that were magnificent in their architecture and their advancement. They fled because of the persecution of the papacy. These silent cities of Syria differ in many respects from the ruined remains of the archaeological past found elsewhere in the world. The monuments are not the work of some foreign invader, but are indigenous, the work of the inhabitants themselves. Furthermore, the stones were skillfully fitted together without cement or mortar. The construction and the arrangement of sanitation are in order and betoken an advanced degree of civilization. Some authors state that the arrangements for health and sanitation would be superior to those found in many places in the Western world today, even in Europe and in America. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But I believe that much of our civilization today owe a tremendous debt to the faithful, spirit-filled, Sabbath-keeping Christian scholars of the ancient world. Tangible remains of their civilization indicate that these people who inhabited the greater part of the smaller towns of northern Syria composed a large, well-to-do middle class. They seem to have no superiors living near them. We look at these silent cities to understand why they lay silent in the desert. One must notice the policy of imperial Christianity during the centuries prior to the time when the scourge of Mohammedanism fell on the Roman Empire. You see, immediately after the Council of Nicaea in 325, the inroads of the northern Goths became serious. The Roman Empire, determined to repel them, had to closely unify. In addition to this unification of the Western world, imperial Christianity made the punishment of heresy a serious part of its program. Then terrible persecution fell on those who rejected the Church of Rome. And these armies of the Roman Empire, before the movement of Mohammedanism, were making inroads into the Eastern world and persecuting these people. They fled into Persia. They fled into India. They fled into China. And there they enriched those cultures with their advanced knowledge and learning, and with the knowledge of the Sabbath, and with the soon coming Messiah. We can see in the architecture of the Ottoman world today, the great domes and parapets, something of the advanced knowledge of architecture of these people today. What were they like, these people? The quote at the bottom says, "There can be no doubt that the civilization of the Eastern Church was far higher than that of the Western. No one can read the account of the capture of Constantinople by the Crusaders of the 13th century without perceiving that it is the occupation of refined and civilized capital by a horde of comparative barbarians." As these soldiers of European imperial Christianity forced their way into the advanced culture of the East, they, like cavemen, looked upon the magnificent edifices of that advanced world, and we're amazed.